Hey everyone, welcome back. I wanted to talk about cross-hatching today. Um, there's a lot of different interesting things to talk about with cross-hatching, and it took me a while to think it all out, uh, but hopefully this is useful. Here is a recent drawing that I feel like was successful with the cross-hatching style that I like to work with these days. So, uh, thinking about cross-hatching, what is its purposes? I was looking around for old drawings uh, and seeing how I developed it and started to handle it. So assuming we've got light coming in here, I used to just do this kind of noodly shading. It's not a great look for it, but I used to just shade things in and just slowly develop a really soft thing, trying to mimic light or mimic this smooth value transition exactly. Then I found a few drawings that uh, were really good at cross hatching, and I decided that was a look that I wanted. So the first thing that cross hatching can do for us is define values. So if we've got the light coming in from this top right, it doesn't really matter what our hatching looks like. There's a squiggle. Anything can do really to divine, uh, demonstrate the value description. So showing where the shadow is on this ball can really look like anything, anything you can do to darken in that area. Another way to approach it is to think about plane orientation and how you can use your cross hatching to define, to demonstrate what the plane orientation is. So I'll show you here in a second, but this was really my earlier approach to cross hatching. I had these very soft light lines, and I would move with the form like this. So if you see how the orientation of each of these lines kind of changes orientation as it goes around, so that is giving you some information of what the form of that ball is, how the geometry wraps around. So plane orientation. Uh, More recently, I've moved towards kind of a structural flow, is what I'm calling it. So maybe some of these kind of flowing with the orientation of the ball, but also demonstrating the light. Sometimes I might go with or across the form, kind of building them up together. And I guess it doesn't demonstrate it so well with the ball here, but when I show you some faces, that I feel like it can make more sense. And finally, I guess ultimately you can kind of demonstrate design. I think I don't really know how to demonstrate this here, but that might be when you've got an eyeball on a person. I feel like I like to do my cross hatching in a way that leads your eye in by the way it's oriented and frame out what's important. I'll have to show you some examples to make that clear. So let's start looking through some examples. So I want to start with this one, which is really early on style for me. Early on as far as my adult professional career, I guess. So your style is a reflection of your personality. That's what I'm always telling students. Oftentimes, at the beginning of your art career, you're trying to figure out a style. You're trying to find a style, and you feel like you can develop it. But my point for different students is always you're not developing a style. You're learning how to. Well, you draw enough, and that your style finds you, because your style is your personality. It's almost like I can change my style easier by changing my personality. than I can by just drawing different. Your personality is going to find its way to the surface. So drawing a lot, doing any kind of art a lot, your personality is going to reflect itself through your style. So I think at this time I was more, I don't know, maybe more stiff, more proper, more. You can see how it's very structured and straight and hard lines. It's interesting. At the time, I worked with a 3mm mechanical pencil, so a really small line. It's kind of like an architects like to use them, I understand. But nice, clean, small lines. It's very light. Reserved might be a good description of it. So there's a first one. Here's a figure drawing. This is interesting because I haven't mentioned it for a little while, but I found that beginners in art really get stuck on details and they focus on details too much, and student level artists are often in medium shapes. So as I looked at this, I looked at that arm, that upper arm that is closest to us, and I can see so much of those medium shapes in there, and they distract from the large shape, just these big, wide shape and lines. There's so much placed on those medium shapes that they're not folded into a larger picture, if that makes sense. But the cross-hatching, you can see a lot of these very straight lines, and they're just these patterns of straight lines. They don't actually offer that much information. They give you a little bit about what the plane orientation is, and they give a little bit of value, but it's really the drawing that's carrying all the weight. So here's another one. I actually really like how this one looks, but as I look at it, I feel like the drawing is doing 80% of the work. That cross-hatching is just so subtle, it's not helping that much. Sometimes it worked though. This one's a little bit further along, but you can see all the cross-hatching is these little sharp little straight lines. This is an example where it's built up enough that it is starting to help with the giving you more information. But you can see how the orientation of each of these lines, they're scratching along this cheek, and they're showing you the orientation of the cheek, and that's nice. But I feel like it's very light, and the drawing's still doing most of the work here. So let's see, and then here's a little further along. So if you look at the face, you see a lot of those similar straight lines. A lot of people still tell me they maybe like this style more, but I feel like my personality has changed and it doesn't suit me as well as it once did. But I think looking through my drawings that it's this work on hair that helped me kind of change my style. So you can see all the hatching on the face is similar to what I just showed you, a lot of little straight lines, but in the hair I'm starting to pull out some of these long lines, and I think I start to recognize that that gave me more information than just the little straight lines. I was starting to learn, convey more information about what's happening. So looking along the cheek here, there's long straight lines, and then the orientation of these little lines. So up above the eye here, there's some of these straight lines like I did before, but over on the other side, I've kind of changed my orientation so it goes with the flow of that upper eye. It starts to tell you more about the whole structure of that eye while giving you the value. So it just became more interesting to me. It's more elegant, I guess, might be a way to say it. Let's see. So value description is anything. Plane orientation was like those little straight lines that I did earlier. Structural flow is what I was starting to get into. Let me jump in a little bit with a slightly different way of presenting hatching. This is more of a design sense. So you can see there's not a lot of hatching that is defining the form that much. It's more using the whole shadow in a design way. So all the hatching is these vertical lines going straight up and down, and it's kind of flattening all the shading areas into a certain area of shadow, rather than each individual area having different planes and formats, structure and all that. And then here is a more recent iteration on that same idea, where you can see all the shaded area, especially on the back 3/4 of his head. It's not vertical, but it's these 45-degree lines. And that's kind of taking all that shaded area and saying this is a flat area of darks instead of all this different structure and shapes and flow. So it's kind of a design decision in that sense. Here's another one. This is, let's see, Hitchcock. There we go. But you can see the bottom half of his face and the suit. It's throwing all those darks into a similar area in kind of a design way. But then on the face, there's a lot of this flow kind of hatching that I was talking about, where the hatching is going with the form. I think this drawing is a really good example, actually. If you look around these cheeks under his eyes, how organic that hatching is. It's giving you all kinds of information in a very kind of a subtle way. It's telling you what's happening. And then this is a more recent one, and yeah, I really like it. It's almost starting to become abstract in a way. There's just lines, and each line is, I guess my focus is maybe turning towards each line and what information I can convey with each line. Someone commented on an Instagram post, actually, and they made the comment that drawing shows you how the artist perceives something, and that maybe a rendered painting is more of what the artist wants to show whoever's viewing it. So they kind of have different things. That's been something I've been thinking a lot about. It's an interesting concept, but it kind of resonates with me that a lot of this is you're seeing how I see the subject. I guess I don't know how to describe it necessarily. I'm still rolling my mind over that idea. But I do like how all of these lines just run and flow, and the organic, stylized nature of it all. Like I said, more abstract. Here's a brand new one that I just posted today on Instagram. This is a quick kind of a drawing where I'm spending less time. I spend less time focusing on getting all the proportions correct, and I'm just kind of letting it flow really quickly. And I would say this becomes very abstract. There's a lot of lines doing a lot of things. It's kind of like a puzzle, or like a maze of lines. But you can look through here and see how the different hatching is mixed in. I guess this one's kind of tricky to analyze. There's a lot going on here. So with this, I wanted to take it in and talk about just different ways that we can approach something. So I've got this kind of coloring book outline of, what's his name? Sorry, names just do not stick for me. So if we're looking at like his cheek and how we can build up each of these lines, each of these forms, there's just, like I said, several ways to do it. In the past, I would have just done a lot of this where I'm going generally across the form. So across the form, if we think of a tube or a pipe, across the form is going to be rolling it up like this. That gives you some information about how the plane's moving and everything else. And then with the form would be the opposite. So you get some darker lines towards the bottom, thicker, heavier lines, lighter lines as it moves up. Maybe I should do this with a different color. So I guess it's something you just want to play with and start to figure out what it is that works for you. But if I'm hatching this way, I'm drawing the viewer's eye into the retina, which I would say is the kind of the focal point of this drawing. So it's interesting. I'm not really a guy that likes to analyze art very much. I have a hard time reading art how-to books. I guess I would say a lot of it I like to kind of rely on just feeling, which is kind of atypical for a lot of the way I live in my life. But I like to not quite understand what I'm doing. I guess it just kind of follow what feels right and see what happens. So it can be tricky for me to present this information because I haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about it. I almost am afraid to spend too much time thinking about it and get out of the natural flow state of things. So I think I've used this example before, but if you're learning how to golf, your teacher can explain how to swing the club and how to move your hips, where to stand, all these different things. And the first time you are learning this, you're going to be thinking about all those different things, which is going to take you out of the natural. So you're good at walking because you've done it so much and you're not thinking about it. Or if you probably had the example or heard the example where people drive somewhere and they don't realize that they had driven. They're just there because their automatic part of their brain is doing the driving. And that's when things really work well, particularly with sports, but drawing, walking, breathing, all kinds of things we're doing with the automatic part of our brain, and that's when it's really comfortable. So you've probably had the opportunity to walk somewhere where you're thinking about your walking. Maybe people are watching you or telling you to walk in a certain way. When you're paying attention to how you're walking, it suddenly becomes difficult. It's complicated. You're thinking about it, which is funny because you're walking every day, all the time. You're not thinking about it, and it just happens, and it's smooth and natural. So I'm getting pretty far afield from what I started talking about, but I think that's the state I try to keep myself in with my drawing. I try not to overanalyze things. It's not always apparent to me exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And I guess I would say cross-hatching is almost the area where this is the most clearly the case. There's a lot that I'm just letting it run. Just putting the thing on automatic and letting it run. And that usually is where I get my best results. So I talked about this kind of simple vertical graphic being vertical cross-hatching being a good way to maybe take whole areas and get them more in like a design kind of a value. So let's do that under the nose here, where I've done a few different passes of cross-hatching already with different orientation that feels right, but they're all kind of broken up into their separate areas. So I can unify them by doing some of this vertical hatching. And it's going to darken up the whole area and unify it because it's all being handled in a similar way instead of just a large number of different approaches, different orientations and forms. So hopefully this is apparent what's going on, because you can see pretty quick how this hatching, it just builds on itself. Build it up like a watercolor. So each pass isn't especially dark, but I can do as many passes as I want and it will build up that value. So you can hopefully see how now I've got these three areas underneath the chin, under the nose, and under the eye, and they've all got that vertical cross-hatching pass, and they've kind of been unified by being treated in a similar way. Let's do a little bit more over here. And here's some hair. So my cross-hatching with this hair, he's got this kind of whitened highlight along the edge of his hair. So when I'm cross-hatching here, I'm going to let it finish before I get down to that highlight. So this is very rough, fast hatching here, but you can see how the orientation of each of my strokes is describing the orientation of the hair and where it's going. And then when I'm stopping or letting up, creating this negative space along here is showing us a little bit of that white highlight where it's catching the light, I think, or maybe it's some white hair of his. Some of the hardest area always for cross-hatching and this orientation idea is the cheek area. So he's got these sideburns that are kind of gonna muddle up what's happening here. So in a design sense, I also like to let my hatching be tight and cleaner in towards the focal point, which is generally the eyes. But then once I get out to these outer regions, then I can be pretty rough with it. And that all serves to differentiate what the focal point is, what I hope the viewer is looking at, recognizing. Okay, so cheeks are difficult areas almost always. So you've got this large, when you're in the eye area, you've got these tight little defined areas and you can hatch each of them and make them all interesting. But once you get to this, the cheek, the forehead, you've got these wide areas where the transitions of plane changes, the surfaces have very subtle change in orientation. So I'm going to look at my reference, and his is kind of interesting because you can see the skin pulls up, and that's more of something that I might highlight with an older subject because it kind of emphasizes the age and the crack. Let's see the wrinkles in the skin. With a younger subject, I'd be more careful about it. think about this. So we've got the cheek here. I like how going along this way, it leads your eye into the focal point, the eyeball here. But we can also do it. There's not necessarily any right answers. So I could follow this flow of his structure, kind of wrap it around. He's got a finger down here that I didn't choose to include, but the finger's kind of pulling his skin. So hatching in this way kind of introduces some of that. You can see it on the reference here. You can see that skin being pulled back a little bit. So maybe with the coat back here, I would do something like this. That's going to help frame out the subject. With something like that on the cheeks where I've got two passes, that also works. There's just a lot of different ways to present it. And I guess my point is thinking about what information is being conveyed with each line as you're hatching and building up these values and the structure. What can you do to highlight the design, highlight the focal points, the areas of interest? What can you do to show as much information as possible? So skin getting pulled back, skin changing orientation, the age of skin, the smoothness of skin. Really quick, let me show you this. This is a young, beautiful model, so I'm limiting how many lines I've got on that cheek. You can see on this girl's face how little information there is on this whole area. Just you need to be very subtle, as little as possible, or light, or build up a lot of cross-hatching that's within the same kind of value range. And then with an older subject, got this guy, or Alfred Hitchcock, you've got all this liberty to really put a lot of lines. All these lines, they tell a story about the subject. They give you information about the subject. And even the limitation of lines tells you information about the subject. So young, pretty, you can feel the smoothness of that face almost because there's so little line to suggest age. Yeah, so I hope this is a helpful presentation. Feel free to please post any questions and I'll see what I can do to give you more information if there's something that I'm not conveying very well, which is almost certainly the case. Thank you.